Okay, so this is Krishna speaking to Arjuna. Sadrisham chestate swasyaha prakrite jnanavanapi prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karisyati. Okay, so maybe some of you will have this verse to hand, so you can kind of follow. So I'll just read this word for word transliteration. Sadrisham, accordingly. Yeah. Chestate, try. Swasyaha, by his own. Prakritihi, modes of nature. Jnanavan, learned. Api, although. Prakritim, nature. Yanti, undergo. Bhutani, all living entities. Nigraha, repression. Kim, what? Karisyati, can do. Translation. Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, for everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the three modes. What can repression accomplish? Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Unless one is situated on the transcendental platform of Krishna consciousness, he cannot get free from the influence of the modes of material nature, as it is confirmed by the Lord in the 7th chapter, 714. Therefore, even for the most highly educated person on the mundane plane, it is impossible to get out of the entanglement of Maya simply by theoretical knowledge or by separating the soul from the body. There are many so-called spiritualists who outwardly pose as advanced in the science, but inwardly or privately are completely under particular modes of nature which they are unable to surpass. Academically, one may be very learned, but because of his long association with material nature, he is in bondage. Krishna consciousness helps one to get out of the material entanglement, even though one may be engaged in his prescribed duties in terms of material existence. Therefore, without being fully in Krishna consciousness, one should not give up his occupational duties. No one should suddenly give up his prescribed duties and become a so-called yogi or transcendentalist artificially. It is better to be situated in one's position and to try to attain Krishna consciousness under superior training. Thus one may be freed from the clutches of Krishna's Maya. Okay. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhuntale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paskyatya Deshatarine. So, I want to begin by saying it's a real pleasure to be in connection with all of you again, and we begin by begging your blessings so that by your mercy we can speak something that will be pleasing to Prabhupada, and that will be nourishing to the soul. It's a very interesting verse in the Bhagavad Gita. We've been explaining to audiences recently that there's a lot of anxiety in the world, and people have a superficial idea of what's causing the anxiety, but we want to suggest that there's a deeper reason for the anxiety in the world. And when I say a deeper reason, I do not mean the coronavirus. Okay, there's a reason deeper still. I was listening recently to one clinical psychologist, and he was explaining something which was completely relevant to what we are discussing here. He was explaining that one of the root causes of anxiety is when an individual has a belief system that collides with reality. Okay, so one has a certain view of the world, a certain understanding of the world that one holds to. And then as one is on their journey throughout their current life, their belief system gets shaken because something happens, a situation or many situations that force them to literally have to go back to that fundamental belief system and restructure it in some significant way. In one sense, that's what's happened with the situation we're in now, but more widely, it happens to every single person. And to be really honest, it includes the devotees. Okay? It includes the devotees. There are two things necessary to navigate life effectively. One has to have an accurate map of reality. Okay? An accurate map of reality. But it doesn't stop there. Not only must one have an accurate map of reality, one must also be able to apply that. Well, one must understand the map and then be able to apply that map effectively and accurately at any given time, at any given place, or in any given circumstance. So these three things, let's think that through. First of all, an accurate map of reality, right? An understanding of the world that actually fits the realities of the situation, right? So it describes life, it describes the existence, it describes the environment accurately. This is how things really are. That's the first thing. Second, that map has to be properly understood, okay? And then third, having got the map and understood the map, one has to be able to see how does it apply to a particular circumstance. And when one has those three things, you literally become empowered to navigate virtually every situation and circumstance in life accurately, right? What does it mean to have a map? It means to have a clear understanding of where you are, where your goal is, and the journey from where you are to a desirable outcome. This verse in the Bhagavad Gita, this is a key map. This is a key part of the map. It's a key understanding. Okay, even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature. For everyone follows a nature he is acquired from the three modes. What can repression accomplish? And I want to share with you something that happened to me. So it's quite a few years ago, my wife and I, we were on our way to a mentorship retreat with His Holiness Satchidananda Maharaj. And we were discussing something with him on the journey. And then he posed a question to me. He said to me, but Bhuta Bhavana, do you know who you are? That's what he said to me. He said, do you know who you are? And what was very interesting is from that point onwards, somehow I started getting into an understanding of natures, starting to understand more and more about different people's natures, my own included. So it just suddenly so much insight from the teachings became available in that way. And maybe you can relate to this. Sometimes you've seen, many of you won't check films or anything like that, but just thinking back to your past, you've sometimes seen a film, right? Or actually, let's get a better example. I won't even use a film example. I was thinking about my childhood, right? And it's interesting, when you're in your childhood, it appears one way, right? And then what happens is when you become an adult, you turn around and you look back at your childhood, but now through the eyes of a more mature person, a more experienced person, a person who's been around other people and seen how other people do things. And so now you look back at your past literally with a different index, and the whole thing is evaluated differently. Right? It's somewhat an incredible experience. A friend of mine, she was talking about her experience of being with her partner, and they have a child. And she told me she said something about her parents, actually. What she said is, see, because she reflected, now that she had a child, she had a house, you know, they had money, they had a career, and her husband had pointed out to her that the way that she was looking after the money was not very effective. And he was saying to her, no, we have to save, we can't spend. And she very much appreciated it. But because she saw his example, she started to look back to her childhood, and she said to me, my parents would just squander money. They would just waste money. And she had this reflection, and it struck me when she told me. She said, they never taught me to look after money. And the way that they looked after money wasn't very good. And because the way they looked after money wasn't very good, I inherited these habits unconsciously. Right? And it was an interesting statement because it got me thinking about two things. The first thing is how much we pick up consciously and unconsciously just by association. And how much we pick up, especially when we are young, right? Because we don't have the filter of the intelligence to filter through what we're going to accept and what we're going to reject. So that's one thing. We call this nurture, okay? Upbringing, environment. But there is another side, ladies and gentlemen. And this other side is what Krishna is speaking about here. Even the man of knowledge acts according to his own nature. When I look back on my past, Krishna gave me one of the most shaking wake-up calls that I've had in decades. Because when I look back at my past, I saw how many times I had been trying to be something different to my nature. Right? I saw how many times I had tried to do something that my peers were doing, but what was really interesting is when they were doing it with ease, with finesse, with style. And I was trying to do the same thing, and it was a complete disaster. It was a complete car crash. And when I started to dive into this topic, I started to understand why. And this understanding is gold in the modern world, and is so powerful. Krishna speaks about this point. He speaks about Varna Shankara. And it literally means people who do not understand who they are. I was preparing a presentation for some youth, which I may do in a few weeks' time. And I was thinking of a title for the presentation. And the title I came up with was No ID, No Impact. Okay? No identity, no impact. What do I mean by this? The root compass for all of our activities is identity. Try and understand that. The root compass of all of the things that we do, it's traced back to identity. I remember being in a seminar by one Prabhupada disciple, and he was explaining that the decisions, the choices that the mind makes is actually based upon identity. So depending on who I think I am, that determines the choices that I make in life. And then the choices that I make in life determine my destination in life. Incredibly powerful. And then someone, actually one guru was referencing a documentary. And in this documentary, it was talking about the same point. The documentary was saying that the is on a weakness of identity, and then tries to tell the person that you can regain your identity by buying my product. And literally, you can regain your identity by wearing the identity of my brand. Right? You're valuable because you have an Apple iPhone. You're valuable because you have Nike trainers. You're valuable because you shop in Tiffany's or whichever organization. So when you have a society who lack identity, then they also lack focus and they're not clear on where they should be going. So Krishna consciousness is the greatest transformation. Why? Because Krishna consciousness begins on the platform of spiritual identity. Dehinosmin yata dehi kumranyovanam jara. Tata dehantara praptir dira tatra namuyate. It's a big thing. It's a big thing. The first principle, the first thing that frees us is the understanding that you're not the body, right? We come in contact with that knowledge, transformative, transcendental wisdom, okay? So this map, okay, let's reorientate the world. Let's turn this around. How do we do this? First point, by letting everyone know, no, you're not the body. You're not male, you're not female, you're not English, you're not African, you're not German, you're not Indian. Jivara Supoy Krishnera Nityadas. First point, you're not the body, you're an eternal servant of Krishna. To the extent that we deeply imbibe and deeply accept that identity, to that extent the entire orientation changes. And the most important subtle thing is, if I change my identity, I also change my desire. So if I know that I'm an eternal spirit person, spirit soul, and if I know therefore that I will nourish myself with spiritual food, spiritual artifacts, then my whole life changes its orientation. My whole life changes its orientation. So one of the most powerful things that we can do as devotees, because I've been thinking about this for decades, how do we relish Krishna consciousness on a much deeper and more powerful platform? One of the simplest things that any devotee can do is look to find ways in which they can deepen their identity as the spirit soul rather than the body. The more that we imbibe that, the more that we start to orient our lives, and the more that also we become fearless. I was listening to a class by Prabhupada this morning, and he was talking about this point, that as long as one is in material consciousness, they must be fearful. But the more that we can get into spiritual consciousness, the more fearless we are. Now there's some subtleties to this. And I was trying to think, how does this work? Or what are the subtle reasons why a person who's more spiritual is more fearless? And one of them hit me. So to be honest, in the UK, we've had over the last few weeks, a few deaths, a few devotees, or people who are related to devotees who passed away from the coronavirus. Quite a few, actually. And what it's done, to be really honest, is it's got many people thinking about death and the time of death and what it means. Now, one of the subtle things which are not often spoken about is that to the extent that one is free of the bodily identification, to that extent, anything that happens to the body does not intensely affect the individual. You see, there are degrees of being affected by something. It's not that everyone with the same illness or the same situation is affected equally. So what I do for a living is we teach leaders. And one of the things that's come up a lot in our discussions with leaders around the world is how staff manage when they are all having to live at home and having to self-isolate and having to do their work often remotely. And one of the most interesting points of discussion that came up is how different people experience self-isolation differently. Now, many people think, oh, self-isolation, I can't be around all the people I usually am around, etc. But to be honest with you, there are many people, when they're self-isolating, they're having the time of their life. I'll be honest, and some of you will be in that category as well. They're absolutely loving it. They're at home, in their environment. And what's interesting is, oftentimes, those are people who get their energy by being alone. You see? In other words, there are many people who have a psychological orientation which we call extroverted. They're introverts, sorry. An introvert tends to get their energy by being by themselves, right? Then you have the other side, you have people who are extroverts. Extroverts are people who tend to get their energy from being around other people, interacting with other people. So just as we can all be in the same globe, having the same pandemic and experiencing it in different ways, in the same sense, we can have all the period or the experience of preparing to leave the world, and everyone can experience it in different ways according to consciousness, and specifically to the extent that we are free of the bodily identification. The more that someone is free or has elevated their consciousness into higher states, the less that any bodily disturbance will actually affect them. Krishna consciousness is just so powerful and so practical. Now, there's a bit more to it though, because we talked about the idea that we're not the body, but there's also our social identity in the world. I remember hearing a class by Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and he was talking about our movement, to be very honest. And he was talking about the youth in our movement. And he said something which was quite sad. He said that he could see that for many of us, many of the youth in our movement, they lack a strong sense of identity. And when that happens, what does it mean? He said, it means that there's a weakness in the culture. I was studying Ayurveda. I was studying the section in Ayurveda, which is called the Kaumara Britya. The Kaumara Britya is child psychology. And it explained in that section how you bring up a child who has a strong, confident, high self-esteem identity. Right? The science is very clearly explained in that section of the of Ayurveda. And it's very simple that between 0 to 5, the child is meant to be given unconditional love. Right? Well, it's explained in the Ayurveda is that between 0 to 5, the child's intelligence isn't fully developed. It's not developed properly. So the child between those ages cannot properly discriminate. So when the parents don't spend time with the child, the translation in the child's consciousness is, Mum and Dad didn't spend time with me, therefore I'm not valuable, I'm not important. Right? The other thing it explains is between 0 to 5, if the child is chastised or told off, then the child, because they don't have the filter of the intelligence, they can't translate that, oh, I've done a wrong action. The translation for the child is, no, there must be something wrong with me. You know? So therefore, and Prabhupada, and many of you will know this quote from Prabhupada, so Prabhupada would quote Chanakya, 0 to 5, you treat them like a king, you know? You just give them this unconditional acceptance. Doesn't mean you don't guide them or steer them, but you don't chastise them because they won't understand the chastisement properly. They'll translate it in the wrong way. Then when they hit 5, then you deal with them differently. You teach them responsibility. And it's interesting, when they hit 16, Prabhupada is quoting Chanakya, he says, you treat them like a friend, right? It's so amazing. What happened, and this is in a company I was working for many years ago. So Krishna showed me just how powerful this was. I had a colleague at work. Her name was Lily. And she, you know, through various conversations in the office, she would talk about how her and her father were really close. And I thought, okay, let me think, let me apply what Prabhupada said. Let me see if there's a synergy, if there's a connection here. And so I said to Lily, so you and your father are really close? She said, yes. I said, so tell me about how your father treated you. And she said that in my teens, my father stopped talking to me like I was a small child, and he talked to me like a friend. And because he talked to me like a friend, she said, I tell my father everything. I don't hide anything from him. Incredible. And I thought, just see, isn't that exactly what Prabhupada spoke about? Incredible. So this point about a strong sense of identity is extremely powerful. I was giving a seminar on the weekend just gone for Chandramuli Maharaj's Disciples Retreat. And we were talking about different types of faith. And we were quoting the Goswamis and also Jaiva Dharma. So in Jaiva Dharma by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he talks about two types of faith. He talks about Shastriya Shraddha, the faith that comes from scripture. And he also talks about Lokik Shraddha. Lokik Shraddha is the faith that comes by being part of a crowd. You see? And that's an interesting statement, because if I don't have faith in myself, then I will just go along with what everyone else is doing because I just want to be accepted. To the extent that I don't accept myself, to that extent, I may be depending on other people to accept me. And when I was thinking about this, something hit me, and it struck me that therefore, if we want to be successful spiritual people in a world where people want to do something which is ungodly, then think about it. Do we have to have stronger faith or not? What do you think? Absolutely. We have to have faith which is so strong that we can go against the tide. You see? It's a very interesting point. We have to nourish that strength and that faith and that identity so we can be comfortable to be the spiritual person in a world where everyone is seeking materialism. It's a very powerful point. So identity leads to impact. Identity, if I have a stronger sense of who I am, and if it's based upon a deeper teaching, not just my own idea, but if it's truly based upon a deeper teaching, a teaching which is a proper description of reality, and if that identity is nourished by activity, nourished by knowledge, but most importantly, nourished by loving guidance, affection, and spiritual validation, then you become one of the strongest, most powerful, unique, and truly individuals on the face of the planet at this moment in time. Prabhupada was so powerful for a number of reasons. One of the things about Srila Prabhupada that made him so powerful is because he was like a universal father. I took this lens. I started to look back at my past, but I also started to look at Prabhupada and his interactions. So many of you have seen memories of Prabhupada. You'll have heard stories of Prabhupada. You'll have seen Following Srila Prabhupada, the DVD series. And when I looked back, it hit me. I thought, my God, I just saw something. It was amazing. I saw that Prabhupada, being such a perfect and nourishing father, what he did with the devotees is, because he was so nourished himself, and because he was so connected with the source of all love, Krishna, in his interactions with his disciples and other people, he could understand what they needed, when they needed it, and he would just give it to them, right? So in his interactions, he would be validating his disciples. He would know how much to give them a kind word, how much to give them correction, whatever they needed at different times. He would be so perfectly attuned that they would become stronger and stronger individuals to the extent that they took up and they imbibed what he was offering them. Like a perfect parent. A perfect parent. And therefore they were nourished in knowledge, but they were also nourished in the affection, in the dealings between him, them, and therefore because they saw his example, as they matured, they became that same example for one another. That is how you create a true, empowering, loving culture of people. Now, the one other thing I'll come back to before we open up for questions is that there's two levels of identity. The first is that we're grounded in the spiritual identity. But it doesn't stop there. Why doesn't it stop there? Because this verse says that even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, for everyone follows the nature he has acquired. So this goes back to what I saw. So where I constantly failed in life, I was trying to be this super manager. Execution, organize things, get stuff done. My friends, oh my God, and if you saw them, I mean, they could manage in their sleep, you know? They could manage while taking prasadam, right? They could manage while having a mango lassi. They were that good at management. I would spend all day trying to do the same thing. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. And then when I hit upon this understanding of natures, I realized why. I realized why. And this relates to the Vana identity. So yes, I'm a spirit soul, true. But that spirit soul is expressing itself in this external world in this lifetime. So it's expressing itself through what we call the swabhav, yeah, through my nature. And it's interesting, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, your swabhav does not change, yeah? Your swabhav, your nature doesn't change. It becomes purified, but it does not change. Very interesting. So people talk about being themselves, but actually we have a deeper, more accurate understanding of what it means to be yourself. There is myself in the mode of ignorance. There's myself in the mode of passion. There's myself in the mode of goodness. And there's myself on the transcendental platform. So when we talk about being ourselves, we're literally talking about being the best, which means the transcendental version of ourselves. So we wanted to encourage you on the basis of this verse in purple to first of all nourish your identity. I've been putting together some research on this. The trouble with the modern world is we try to go for superficial solutions. And there's sometimes a need for that. Sometimes you need a quick fix because there's an emergency. But I would encourage you to really think, how do I nourish? And this is, in one sense, what our entire process is about. How do I nourish my deep identity? How do I do that, right? Because the thing that we carry through every circumstance is ourselves, is our own identity, our own consciousness. We bring that through every interaction, every experience, every speech. I mean, it's incredible. You can tell so many things about a person by the way that they speak. When I was learning about Varnas, it was amazing. I was in Germany and we were speaking, this was Goloka Dham. We were speaking in the area where they take prasadam. And my wife and I were speaking to one of her friends and she was talking. I think she's gone to visit the zoo or something like that. And she was talking about the animals. And she said, I realized why why it's such a great experience. Because I think she was talking about the lion. And she said, the lion is so strong, so majestic, so powerful. And literally every word she was using and describing, the more she described these powerful, majestic words, the more she was becoming excited. And I was just smiling. I was just giggling because I could see, she's a Kshatriya. You know, so what happens is she's speaking her value system, right? She's speaking her value system because it's interesting in the Mahabharata, there's a pastime where the Pandavas, they are undercover. So they're Kshatriyas, but they're dressed like Brahmins because they're in disguise. And they enter the palace of the king. And the king is watching them. And what he notices is these people are dressed as Brahmanas. But when they're looking around the palace, they see on the walls these weapons. And they immediately move to the weapons on the wall and they start looking at weapons and talking about the weapons. They're very interested in the weapons. And the king understood, these guys can't be Brahmanas, right? Because Brahmanas, they're not going to be interested in weapons, right? And he saw the build also, he thought, no, there's something wrong here. These dudes must be Kshatriyas, right? Because what happens is, due to the inherent value system that we have, Some things in the environment will become more in the forefront. They'll draw our attention more. And some things will become less important. They'll draw our attention less based upon our value system. You see? Based upon, and it's interesting with my friends who are managerial, they notice everything about management. When we go to a program, they'll notice how it's well organized, everything was on time, everything, everyone had whatever they needed. Because they're managerial, they notice these things because it's their value system according to their nature. So we have, to be honest, Prabhupada has given us so much incredible treasure to help the modern world and to help ourselves if we know how to take advantage of it. He's given us not only the spiritual understanding, but even how to maneuver our way in this world as we go on our journey to fully realize who we are spiritually. And the last thing is, when we understand who we are better, it's easier to understand who we're dealing with. I just agreed, so in the UK, they have this, what they call the School of Bhakti. And they do these different seminars, and they're doing a lot of seminars online. And I've just agreed to do a seminar, and feel free to tune in if you like to. I've just agreed today, I'm going to do a seminar on how to find a compatible partner. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in the seminar is that if you want to find a compatible partner, and this is directly what Prabhupada says, you look for someone who's got a similar nature to you. If the nature is similar, then the expectations and the values are similar. Therefore, it's easier to connect, to understand, and to relate to such a person. There was a study done of this. Very interesting. So even in the secular world, they did a study of this. They looked at couples who had been married for a long time and who were happily married, who both independently said that they feel happy in their marriage. And they did a lot of analysis to find out, what is it? Why are they happily married? What are they doing differently to others? And the number one conclusion of the study was that those couples who were happily married, the husband and wife had similar values. And this is exactly what Prabhupada states in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Where they have a similar nature. The term that's used in Sanskrit is swajati, right? Because, and it's interesting, what I'm going to explain in the seminar is it becomes even more important now than in the past. Because in the past, we were brought up to be more dutiful. So you'll see sometimes in the past, that wasn't there, but it didn't matter so much. Because we were brought up to be more dutiful, right? In the past, many people grew up in the more traditional way, in the more traditional culture, is that you learn to love the person that you marry, right? In the past also, we did not have this. We did not have the mobile phone. Therefore, we did not have this instant gratification, this instant expectation. I remember when I was young, it was only when I'm going to ask you to put your phone on mute, please. It was only when I went to university that mobile phones really took off. And I remember when I was at university when people started using the text message. So before the mobile phones and before text messages, if I wanted to call someone, I would have to wait until I go home, and then I would make the phone call. There's no such thing as being accessible all the time, you see? And so when we have this technology, it affects the consciousness in a certain way. Subconsciously, when people grow up in a culture where things are instant text message, instant WhatsApp, instant calling, instant checking of information. When I was younger, there was no Google. So when a group of people, when a generation grew up in a culture where everything is instant, then we should understand that it's going to affect them unconsciously. And what will be the unconscious effect? The unconscious effect will be, there'll be more a tendency to expect things to work out instantly. And therefore, there'll be less tolerance and less patience for things if they don't work out quickly. So we have to also factor this in. Again, what we said at the beginning. a map of reality that accurately explains in detail how the world works. That's point one. Point number two, understanding that map properly. So this is, and the Goswami speak about this. Jiva Goswami speaks about this. He says in the Tattva Samdarbha, 3 types of evidence. Shabda, which is the map of reality. Anuman is the inference. So I've got the map, I've got the teachings. What does it imply? Right? Inference. And then you have pratyaksha, which is the 3rd stage. So I've got the map of reality. I look at what's implied by the map of reality. And then pratyaksha is I look into the outside world to see if what I've implied is accurate. You see? What have I implied? Is that accurate? I look in the world and I see. So going back to the example, if the scripture says 0 to 5, you treat them like a king because it builds strong self-esteem. 5 to 15, you give them responsibility. 16, you treat them like a friend.
That's just being silly.
Put their phone on mute, please. If that's accurate, then you look out into the world and you see, okay, let's see which parents have a really good relationship with their children. And you see that the ones who have a good relationship are where the parents have treated their older teenage children like adults. So the child doesn't feel, oh, mum and dad is still talking to me like I'm a young person, even though I'm an adult. And the child therefore doesn't reject the parents, isn't arguing with the parents, because the parents, either from culture or from teachings, has followed something that is exactly in line with our teachings. Incredible. So we've been given so much. We just have to unpack the gift, really. And we have to dive in. The one last thing I'll say is the more that we unpack the gift, the more that we can experience the power of the teaching for ourselves. And the more that we experience the power of the teaching, the more it gives us even more faith to dive into the gift even more. So bhakti breeds bhakti. Okay, so we'll stop there. And then I'll take some questions if that's okay. Yep, okay. So I can see quite a few questions here. So I'm going to see if I can go backwards because I can see there's quite a few questions and I don't want to miss them. Let's see if we can go backwards. If not, I'll just, let's see if we can pop it out. Okay, I think I can do this. Okay, I'll just answer the questions I can see on the screen. So the first one, the Varnas are described in Shastra are kind of ideal versions. Rajas, Varna, Shankara find a strong mixed qualities in us. How can we balance these different tendencies? It's a good question. So I've done a lot of research on this. Yes, in Kali Yuga, there's a lot of mixing, a lot of mixture. That's true. But it's not completely mixed. Everyone will have a predominant tendency. You know, everyone will have a predominant tendency. So it's a big topic, that one. It's a big topic. But you can consider a few things. You see, the difficulty is that when we don't have enough self-esteem, then we try to do whatever is validated by the environment. You see? So when we don't have proper self-esteem, that even if my natural gift is in one direction, if everyone else who does something different gets a lot of recognition and applause, I may feel pressure to try and do what they are doing. So that's why it does also require, it often requires objectivity. It often requires a perspective from people who know us well. So we can introspect, what am I good at? Right? What am I really honestly good at? I've got an idea of what I'm good at. Then I also start to speak to friends and family. When have you seen me at my best? What do you feel that I do well? When do you see me that I'm very joyful and energized in my activities? And based upon that, that can help us to identify. And I'll give you a few clues. So the Brahmanas, they tend to love to teach. They have a natural tendency for teaching, and they also have a natural tendency, they have a natural ability to digest and reproduce knowledge. Okay, so they can take knowledge in, they can digest it, and then they can actually represent the same knowledge but in a different way. Okay, so that's one of the clear giveaways that you're dealing with a Brahmana. Okay, the Kshatriyas, they love to be in charge, they love to lead, but it's not just leading, actually. Particularly, they're very strong and they're very driven around community and protection, building community, building protection. They're very comfortable about taking charge, but to lead people. Okay, the business-minded person, the Vaishya, Vaishyas are very good often at management. Vaishyas are often very good at executing and dealing with things. They're very good at leading things naturally, but they may not be as strong in leading people. So there's more a tendency and more of an aptitude around organizing resources, whereas a Kshatriya is very strong around organizing people, but they also have some ability to manage resources as well. And if someone has a Shudra nature, they feel more comfortable being assistive. They feel more comfortable not having to take the leading responsibility, but supportive responsibility. The other thing about the Shudras is they often have very strong artistic capability. They may have very great singing skills or great acting skills, etc. So these are just some ideas, but like I said, it's a little bit more deep than that, because that's a whole other seminar. The reason why I say it's deep is because, for example, the head of my company, so I work for an investment bank. It's basically like a global bank that's present in 60 countries, and they have 250,000 employees around the world. Now, it's an investment bank, but the person who's in charge of the company, he's a Kshatriya. He's a Kshatriya. And because he's a Kshatriya, the way he runs the investment bank is different to the way that a Vaishya would run an investment bank. Because he's a Kshatriya, there's more of a tendency around community, protecting, helping the society, building up the society. You'll see more of that protective element in his leadership, because definitely he's interested in profit, but because of his nature plus his position as a leader, it permeates through the way that he leads the organization. You see, so sometimes there's these subtleties that also take place. Okay, let's go to another question. Let's see. I'm only 4 years in Krishna consciousness, almost 50 years old. Through chanting, reading, and serving, I see more and more impurities in my heart. How can I have a good relationship myself when all these impurities and tendencies are there? To be honest with you, the problem isn't that the tendencies are there. I was discussing this with one of my mentees. The fact that these tendencies are there and that you can see them, that can be one of the most powerful and positive signs that you can ever have in Krishna consciousness. Why? Because what happens if you clean properly? If you're doing proper cleaning, you're going to see all the dirt. But you're seeing the dirt. Why? Because the dirt's coming up because you're cleaning it away. Okay? So there's two things that we can focus on in Krishna consciousness. We can focus on the problem, or we can focus on the solution. My advice to you is the way to remain enthusiastic is to focus on the quality of the cleaning, not the dirt that comes up when you're cleaning. In other words, to translate that, focus on the quality of the hearing, focus on the quality of the chanting, focus on the quality of the association, and engage in Krishna consciousness in a way that you will feel enthusiastic. See, life, the flavor of our existence, our life is like a good sabji, okay? Our life is like a good sabji. The taste of the sabji is not actually due to the ingredients in the sabji. It's not. That's a superficial way of looking at it. The experience of the sabji is due to how the different ingredients counterbalance each other. You see? So we're all at a restaurant, we're all at Govinda's, and we're taking prasadam. We're all having a sabji. But in your sabji, it's got the same ingredients as my sabji. But you hate your sabji, but I love my sabji. But they've got the same ingredients. Why is it that you hate your sabji, but I love my sabji? It's because the same ingredients were there in your sabji and in my sabji, but in your sabji, they were in the wrong balance. So you had too much salt and not enough spice. I've got the right balance of salt, the right balance of spice. So therefore my sabji, delicious. Your sabji, you're calling the waiter, you're telling the restaurant, I need a refund. Okay? So it's not that we have challenges that are the problem. It's not the problem. It's, okay, the challenges, okay, the cleaning, the things that come up, yes, but it's got to be counterbalanced by sweet association, encouraging association. It's got to be counterbalanced by, I've got that exciting project that I'm involved in. It's got to be counterbalanced, like, yeah, I learned something new and I'm excited about it. So the question is, what is the sabji, what's the sabji like? And do I have the different ingredients in the right balance? If I have the ingredients in the right balance, then I can have sabji again and again and again, and I'll still feel wonderful. So that's how I would answer that question. It's not about whether things are coming up. That's not the problem. Focus on the cleaning, but make sure you have these positive ingredients in your life. So you may feel I've got these impurities. Okay, but that's one flavor. That's one spice. But I've also got this loving association of devotees who encourage me. That's another flavor. I've also got these wonderful classes where I feel inspired and I learn new things. That's another flavor. And because all these different spices come together in the right balance, the overall meal is delicious. Okay, so let me take another question. Let's see. Thanks for the lecture. You said that everyone has his own map, which is basically the interaction in the most. No. So to Kartik, the map is actually the scripture. That's what I was talking to. That's what I was talking about. They said, but this map actually keeps changing based on circumstances. No. So the map of reality is the entirety of our teachings. As we learn the teachings better, we can actually see the reality properly, right? And I'll be very honest with you. I'll give you some very simple examples, right? So, for example, if I'm dealing with someone who's got a certain nature, in ISKCON, I was explaining this in a class, the last class I gave at Bhaktivedanta Mana. I was saying that our movement, and I really mean this, our movement could be at least 100 times more successful with no additional effort. I repeat, our movement could be 100 times more successful with no additional effort, potentially with less effort, actually, if we just reposition people according to their talents. And I think you know what I'm talking about. You sometimes see someone giving a class and you know that this person is just not very good at giving a class. They're just not, now everyone should preach, but that person, they don't like it. They're not good at it. They're struggling to do it. And the class are also struggling because they just feel, oh my God, he's giving class again. Oh no. They didn't realize it was too late. I walked into the temple room and I realized it was too late. I couldn't walk out again because I was being watched. So I had to sit down and I had to bear it. I'll be honest with you. I was in America. There was a youth retreat, and some of the youth in America, they were telling me how they don't go to the classes in the temple. And they were explaining, said that when they go to the classes are dry. They just say the same thing every day. They're saying this, and it's like, how many times can you go to a class and just hear you're not the body? In the same way. They said they just felt there was nothing fresh, there was nothing new. So then they just switch off. So my point is, if we engage people according to their talents, when possible, let's be very clear, it's not always possible. Many of our projects have so few people, everyone has to help out. So don't get me wrong. We're not saying that we shouldn't do what's required, but the more that we engage, the more that we do this when we can, it's incredible. Because what happens is, if you do something that you're good at, you love and you enjoy and you can do it well, what happens? The whole offering expands. I was reading, when Prabhupada saw that Tamal Krishna Maharaj was good at organization, Prabhupada asked him, you organize my movement for me. You can find, I think it's in Lilamrita, if not, it'll be in other pastimes. Prabhupada saw his propensity and he said, you organize my movement for me. And because of that, see, when someone is good at that and you give them that service, the service expands, you see? So now think about this. if every devotee, when it's possible, does or engages in the activity that they're good at, the activity expands, and it also infuses everyone. You go to a program which is really well organized, you feel, wow, oh my God, it was just really well organized, it was on time, everyone had a good time, nothing went wrong. Wow, you feel infused. When someone is leading the community and they're good at leading the community, that community leader, he's so, or she's so good that everyone feels cared for, they're encouraging, they protect me, right? When the person when you're taking prasadam and the person who cooked the prasadam, they can actually cook, then you have the meal, so, bellissimo, wonderful. You see? So when we engage, when possible, according to when the person who's managing can actually manage, it's incredible, because then they can offer more in the community, and you don't have to give that person lots of encouragement. You know why? Because them doing what they're naturally good at, the community will naturally reciprocate because of the quality of what they're offering. But oh my God, I really loved the way that you cooked. Who cooked prasadam? I just wanted to know, Mataji or Prabhu, that was so good. Thank you so much. Oh, it was nothing. All the mercy goes to Krishna and Guru Maharaj. Like that, whatever it is, people just respond that way. So one of the things that Krishna has shown me over the last, I don't know how many years, Krishna's system is very efficient. To be honest, Krishna doesn't want us to struggle in our material life or our external life. He wants us to have the majority of our mental energy and our emotional energy, so we can use that in order to invest that in our spiritual progress, So when we have that opportunity to engage like that, it can be very, very powerful. I'm going to ask everyone to put their phone on mute, please. Okay. Do we have more time for questions, or how do we do this? Because I'm just conscious that we've been going for an hour. I've got time. It's just a question of what works for you guys.
If it's fine for you, please continue.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so let's go on. So Girish, my dear friend Girish. So hope you're well. I have 2 children, age 7 and 9. Most classes are a little too deep for children at this age. Have you thought about doing a class for children between, say, ages 7 and 12? I think it's a great idea. I'm up for the idea. We'd have to schedule when it's possible. But I will say, Girish, from what I know, there are devotees who are doing a lot of things for young children at this time. And I'm happy to look into that or pass on contact details for you, for your children as well. Because I know one very dear devotee in London, Vrinda Kishori, she's been making many things available for young children, young devotees in Krishna consciousness. They're like very playful, very positive as well. So feel free to contact me, and I'll try and pass the details on to you or connect you with that person as well. Okay, let's go to Malini. How can one get in touch with one's real nature and stop living a false identity? Okay, so the first thing to emphasize here is the spiritual, and I'll explain how the two is very interesting. Like I said, since Satchidananda Maharaj said that to me when we were in the coach going to Buckland Hall, which is a property that was owned by the man. It was like a retreat center. Since he said that to me, so much insights come up on this topic. It's incredible. I find it an incredibly exciting topic. So there's a connection between the two. What happens is, as devotees, as we come more to the mode of goodness, the mode of goodness has a quality whereby it allows for a very clear vision. It gives a very clear vision of things, a clear vision of the world, a clear vision of ourselves, a clear vision of other people. So one of the reasons why Prabhupada, when he was on the planet, didn't establish so much about Varnashram is because he knew that if devotees practice properly, as they purify themselves, which means they clear away the mode of ignorance, the mode of passion, as devotees come more to the mode of goodness, they're able to see things more clearly. And that mode of goodness vision allows them to also see themselves and to see other people more clearly. So they can understand, they can see their own nature. their own tendencies, they can see the tendencies of other people more clearly. So as we purify and practice, it actually does happen to some extent naturally in that sense, but you can also speed up that process by studying that particular topic as well. So that's that, like I said, that's a whole that's a whole big discussion. Okay, and that would actually be a few days seminar, but that kind of stuff can actually help to understand that. So yeah, I hope I've given you some idea, a little flavor there. Ricky, you mentioned how when finding a compatible partner, it's important to find someone with a similar nature. Did David Huti and Kamala Mooney have different natures? This is a very good question. So yes, so I'm going to give a little bit of detail here. So this is also mentioned. So Vyasadeva, his father, the father of Vyasadeva, who compiled the Vedanta Sutras, etc., his name was Parashara Muni. And he has a literature called the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. Now, that Hora Shastra, it explains in there that ideally the husband and wife should have similar nature. And if they don't have a similar nature, then the husband should have better attributes than the wife in order for things to be peaceful. So, Kardama Muni is a Brahmana. Devahuti, she's a Kshatriya. You see? So that works according to Hora Shastra. So that works. So the point is, if they have same Varna, great. If not, then according to Shastra, the husband should have superior qualities to the wife for them to be peaceful. If it's the other way around, unfortunately, the man has an ego. So he struggles to deal with a situation where his partner has superior qualities to him. And then it's also said that she struggles to deal with a situation where she feels that the husband is in some way less capable than she is, you know? So that's actually what the Shastra says in that sense. So for a peaceful situation, and Prabhupada actually writes about this, you can read it, you can find these different things. One place, if you want to look into this more, there's a book, I think it's The 4 Goals of Family Life by Jagannath Ishwari. So in that book, she quotes extensively some of the different things that Prabhupada said. And as I said, these are Swabhava. These are the inherent natures, and the inherent natures don't change. You can work around this. Let me explain that also. So this is, if people have that situation, that does not mean your marriage can't work or that you should leave, or no. If you're married, you should make it work. But what it means is, it just made me require a bit more effort to kind of, work through these different things. But it's just that, as we said, Krishna's system is very efficient. So he says, if you do this, it's just less work. It's just easier. You see, like that. Okay, so I think I've made that point. So I've answered that question about them having different natures. If so, was it that their relationship worked really well? So I'll give you another thing on this. The scripture works like an equation. Okay, so let's say I marry someone and our natures are very different. So it may be a bit more work because we have very different expectations. So what makes them excited bores me. And what makes me excited, they have no interest, or they actually find it very negative. Okay, but there's a bit more to it. I'm going to ask you to put your phone on mute. Thank you. But there's a bit more to it. See, sometimes we see a situation, as this has come up. I was speaking to some devotees in the UK, and they said that I've seen devotees who are very similar nature and their marriage failed. I saw other devotees very different and they're still married. So how does that make sense if we're saying this? And I explained to them that the scripture works like an equation. It's like a mathematical sum. So sometimes you have devotees who are married, very different nature, but they both grew up in an environment where they had extended family and they had tremendous support structure. So whenever they're getting frustrated with the other partner, the husband could go to his parents, or the wife could go to their parents, and they could get advice. Yes, don't worry, relax. They could get good advice. They could let off some steam. They could speak their frustrations through, and they can come back. They've released their concerns. they come back with good advice and they carry on. So even though they're not so well matched, because of the support structure around them, they're able to have extra capacity to keep going. Sometimes they may be not so well matched, but also they've grown up in an environment where they saw very, very good and healthy examples of husband and wife working together, collaborating together, supporting one another. So their culture provided them very, very quality training, right? So this is how you speak to your partner, because I saw my dad, when my mother got upset with my dad, this is how my dad responded. He was very cultured. He didn't shout. He gave her time. He listened. He tried to understand. So they got training culturally. So they have this as part of their natural behavior, or they learned it, you see? So then again, so even though they're not so well matched, it's counteracted by their cultural upbringing. It's counteracted by the support structure that they have around them, whatever it is, you see? So it's like an equation. So certain things weren't so strong, but it's counteracted by something else. Again, like we said, like the sabji, right? Some of you are good cooks. If you're cooking something and you put too much salt in, and then your Guru Maharaj is waiting for the meal, you don't have to cook again. You know, okay, I put too much salt in, I'll just put another ingredient that's going to balance it. And then you can still serve the same sabji because you corrected it, you see? So that's how it works. So if the one thing is out, but by training, one can counteract it. By, working together, one can counteract it. By having open discussions and seeing, okay, I know that the things I'm into, you don't like. By maturity, you can counteract it. I even know I heard of one couple, where they realized that if they really keep Krishna in the center, and I'll be honest with you, but that also means that we have to be very Krishna conscious, they were able to counterbalance that, okay? But I'm saying this more for an audience. The seminar I'm preparing is more for an audience who aren't married. So if you're not married, then you would actually follow what Prabhupada said. You find someone with a similar nature. And I'll be honest with you, I first heard this, we were at Bhaktivedanta Manor, 1999. So my spiritual master, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, he was staying at the manor. They had a room which was reserved for sannyasis. And I first heard this at that time. He told us, if you're going to look for a partner, make sure you find someone compatible. He emphasized compatibility at that time. And it's only years later on, I read and I saw Prabhupada said the same thing in the Bhagavatam. So yeah, that's just to answer your question. Let me go and see if there's any other questions. Let's see. Okay, I can see more questions here. I can actually go back. So I'll go to the beginning. How do you find your own identity? So we touched upon that. It can be a journey. I'll just emphasize that. It can be a journey to find our identity. It's not necessarily something that happens overnight, but the two key questions you can start by asking yourself and people who know you. When am I most energized? Right? When do I feel most energized? What are my natural talents and inclinations? And also check that with other people. Prabhupada said that some of the keys to finding your nature, he said it's something that you're good at, that comes naturally to you as well, right? Something that comes naturally to you and that you're good at. Prabhupada said those are some ways in which you can understand your nature. Okay, so anyway, just a little bit of an idea there. I'll go to the next question. Let's see. So we talked about the mixture, and I'll just add one more thing to that. Yes, we do often have a mixture, but there'll be one which is predominant. It's not that, even though in Kali Yuga there's a lot of mixture, it's not that there's just one, it's not just that every mixture is equal in a person. No. Even though we're mixed in Kali Yuga, there'll be a predominance. Okay, so you're looking at that predominance. Is it predominantly about sharing and cultivating knowledge? More likely to be Brahmana. Is it predominantly about leading and leading power and influence for protection? More likely to be predominantly Kshatriya. Is it more around generating profit and scaling something. The Vaishyas have a natural capability to scale something. And they tend to be very good at managing things as well. Please put your phone on mute. Whoever's joined, please put your phone on mute. Thank you. That's that tendency to scale things. You see, like, you know, people, I don't know how it is in Germany, but in the UK, everyone wants to be the next Steve Jobs. And in American culture, it's like that also. But Steve Jobs did not learn to become a businessman. Right? You should be very clear on that. The people who are the most successful business people in the world, they're natural businessmen. In fact, the most successful business people in the world, if you look and study their lives, none of them studied business. Right? The most successful business people in the world, they did not go to business school. They employ people who went to business school. That capability that they have for business is inherent. They're natural Vaishyas. Yeah, and interestingly enough, even the best, some of the most successful artists in the world, like, you know, singers and dancers, they are naturally like that. You see, and what they've done is they've built on and they've invested in the natural talent that they had. Now, that doesn't mean that if you don't have that nature, you can't do business. It doesn't mean that. It just means that it may not be your natural skill set, so it may require a bit more effort and time and investment to do that kind of thing, just so you know. Okay, let me go on to any other questions. Let's see, so we've answered those. We talked about nature, compatible partners. Okay, let's see. Could you share details of the next seminar about relationships? Actually, I don't have the details of that next seminar. I agreed with the School of Bhakti that I will do the seminar, and I gave them some dates that I could do, so they're gonna come back to me. But watch this space. How to find a compatible partner is coming to you on Zoom at some point soon. It'll probably be in May sometime. And it will be a virtual session as well. So what I'm gonna do is it will probably be a 2-hour seminar on the topic. Okay, so let's carry on with the questions. Let's see. Okay, so Kartik. So yeah, the map is more than just the interaction with the modes. It's actually the scriptural understanding about how the material energy works. So let's see, what else? Before this coronavirus, I had different plans, which are mostly oriented towards Brahmana nature. Now I've got a strong urge to plan self-sufficiency, to grow my own food, which is more Vaishya nature. How can one evaluate whether the changes, desire, or thoughts of the original nature? Fantastic. So this is a very good question. I'm really glad you answered that question for 2 reasons, and I'll explain why. What we do in life is based upon not just nature, but it's based upon the needs of the environment as well. So some things we do in life are situational, right? So let's say, for example, let's say that you're an introvert by nature, okay? But you've just lost your job, and therefore you need to get another job. So what do? Because you need to get another job, you have to go out, you have to start to network, you have to start to speak to people. It's not what you would do naturally, but because of the circumstances that you're in, it's required, okay? So that's because of the situation, it's situational. Now, at the same time, if that emergency wasn't there, which required to do something because the situation required it, then what you would do naturally, that would be more likely to show your natural inclination. Now, the one other thing I would say though, and this is why it's really important to study this if you want to get more into it, it's not the case that growing your own food means that you're a Vaishya. You see, that's a misconception. Actually, anyone of any Varna could be into growing their own food, not because of their nature, but because of the mode. See, someone who's more in the mode of goodness will be naturally inclined towards, you know, self-sufficiency to some extent, you see? So it's a misconception that if I'm into growing my own food, that means I've got a Vaishya nature, not necessarily, okay? And just to give you another angle on this, you may think, or we may think, oh, this person is teaching. therefore they must be a Brahmana. Not necessarily, right? Because as you get into natures a bit more, there are some subtleties to it. It's why are they teaching? I'll give a very simple example. I know someone who's got a business nature and they're doing a lot of teaching, but they're doing the teaching in order to gain what? What do you think? Anyone can share on the audio, on the chat. Someone is teaching and they're doing it in order to generate profit because they are a what?
Vaishya.
Yeah, Vaishya. You see? So it's not just what they're doing, actually more deeper, why are they doing it? You see? So the nature is not so obvious just by the activity, right? There's some subtleties to it. I know someone else who's a doctor, okay? And normally, doctors, traditionally, that was a Brahmana activity. But this person, they're a doctor, but they're doing it because of the money and the prestige that they get from being a doctor. You see? So that they're not a Brahmana. But they can still do the role, but they're doing it for a different purpose. So it's not so obvious what is going on just by the activity. There's some subtleties to it. Like I said, that's a whole discussion that we don't have time to get into today, but you can start to research these things if you want to know more about that. Okay, let's see. So if one feels one has a mixture of different varnas, on which varna should one focus? Or should one combine the varnas? Really good to focus on the predominant varna, and everyone does have a predominant varna, but the secondary aspects, they can also be engaged. So I'll give an example. So my nature is, should I talk about mine? Maybe because my one's a little bit unusual. Let me find something that's a little bit more relatable. Let's say that someone, so traditionally, this is a good one. Traditionally, you have a Brahmana. Even in traditional times, there were different types of Brahmana, okay? We look in the Mahabharata, Dronacharya. He's a Brahmana, but why is he teaching the Kshatriya arts? It's because he has an affinity for that topic. So first of all, he's a Brahmana, so he's good at teaching. Now the next question is, what should he teach? You see? So because he has an affinity for the Kshatriya arts, therefore he's the Brahmana who teaches the Kshatriyas. If he had an affinity in a different area, then he will teach in that area where he has that affinity. You see? So there's also how the secondary aspect can also play a role in the expression, right? Even down to the fact that even though the majority of people will be Shudras, which is assistants, and there's nothing wrong with being a Shudra, by the way. The vast majority of people in any community or society will be Shudras. There's nothing wrong with being a Shudra. In fact, most of the devotees who will go back home, back to Godhead, will have a Shudra nature. So you should be very clear, none of the natures are bad. As long as we're very clear on that, none of them are bad. There's the story of the Brahmana and the cobbler. The cobbler is a Shudra. But because he has more faith in Krishna than the Brahmana, he can go back to Godhead, whereas the Brahmana, who's very proud, takes birth again and again. You see? So it's not that the nature determines who goes back to Godhead. Be very clear on that. It's the consciousness, the degree of devotion to Krishna that determines who goes back. So there's different types of Brahmanas based upon their affinity. So some Brahmanas have an affinity for the Kshatriya field, so they teach the Kshatriyas. Other Brahmanas have an affinity for the Vaishya field, so they teach the Vaishyas. As we said, there's also different types of Shudras. So some Shudras have an affinity for the Brahminical field, so they become the assistants to the Brahmanas. Some Shudras have an affinity to the Vaishya and to the Kshatriya field, so they become assistants to the Kshatriyas. This is spoken about in our teachings. So the charioteer, right, in the Mahabharata war, in the Kurukshetra war, the charioteers, the assistants to the Kshatriyas, they're Shudras, you see? But they're the assistants to the Kshatriyas. They engage in that particular assistive role in the battle, you see? So there's all these different fine points to that as well. Okay, let's move on. So we've answered that question. Let's see. How sometimes not in their nature to give class, but they do. That's a good point to bring up. Their strengths lying elsewhere. So sometimes we see that this is where there's most glorification. We take that service. How do we guard ourselves and others from making that decision? So two things. There is, we as devotees, we do some things from the point of view of the ashram and some things from the point of view of the varna. Okay, so let me explain this. All devotees can be Brahminical. All devotees are Brahminical. Why? Because our devotional practices themselves are Brahminical. It doesn't matter what your nature is. Any devotee can give a class. Any devotee can preach. Any devotee can do deity service. Okay? Because from the point of view of the ashram, they can do these things because all devotees can do the purifying practices of Krishna consciousness. But for one to do it as a living, right? For one to do it as a living, either they have to be very advanced or they have to have that nature, you see? So either from the point of view of advancement, right? So because they're advanced in Krishna consciousness, they can just do the direct spiritual practices day in, day out, and that's fine. Or because it's their nature, so they have, let's say, a Brahmana tendency, they can do that. So either because it's their nature or because they are advanced in their ashram, in their spiritual practices, right? Then they're able to do it again and again and again. So we should all, as devotees, be engaged in those direct Krishna conscious activities. Our culture is Brahminical, actually. Right? The direct devotional practices, they're Brahminical. And any devotee can be Brahminical even if they're not a Brahmana. Brahminical means that they've cultivated tendencies that come from goodness. Right now, I know devotees in our movement who have a Vaishya nature and they're Brahminical at the same time. In other words, we have Brahminical Vaishyas in our movement. And they can give incredible classes, right? Because what's happened is through cultivating the direct devotional practices, their nature has been elevated through to the mode of goodness. But they're not Brahmanas by nature. You see? They're Brahminical. They're not Brahmanas, but they are Brahminical. You see? So a Brahminical Vaishya. You have some people who are Brahminical Kshatriyas. Interesting. In the Mahabharata, Karna, he didn't want to fight Yudhisthira. Why is it that he didn't want to fight Yudhisthira? The reason why he didn't want to fight Yudhisthira is when he saw Yudhisthira's qualities, he thought this person's qualities are so refined, they can't be a Kshatriya. This person must be a Brahmana. Right? That's why he didn't want to fight Yudhisthira. But Yudhisthira is a Kshatriya, but he's a Sattvic Kshatriya. You see? He's a Sattvic Kshatriya. And because he's a Sattvic Kshatriya, his qualities, they somewhat resemble the qualities of the Varna above his own. You see? In other words, when you have a very Sattvic Shudra, they'll have some characteristics which are similar to the Varna just above them, which is Vaishya. When you have a very Sattvic Vaishya, their qualities will resemble, they'll somewhat, not completely, but they'll have some resemblance to the Varna just above their own. So a Sattvic Vaishya will have some qualities which somewhat resemble a Kshatriya's qualities. When you have a very Sattvic Kshatriya, they'll have qualities which somewhat resemble the qualities of the Varna just above them, which is the Brahmana. You see? So that's why, again, these are subtle things. As I said before, it's a whole science to it, but that's how it works.